Did you know that the fonts that you're using on your book cover, in the interior of your books, or even in your marketing graphics are copyright protected and you need the proper licensure to be able to use them? Let's break this down with everybody's favorite lawyer.
My name is Tony Iliakostas. I'm an adjunct professor of entertainment law and IP at New York Law School. And I have an Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok account called The IP Professor that's dedicated to all things intellectual property.
Tony, when it comes to designing our novels, we know that fonts are a big part of our covers, of our interior, and we also know that as we are creating our books, we have to make sure we're obtaining the proper licensure for every element that we're using inside of our books. So can you talk to us a little bit about the legal perspective of using fonts inside and on our novels?
Yeah, so fonts, generally speaking, are uniquely created by graphic designers. They may have sort of an artistic flair, a very specific structure to them that may make themselves unique from kind of the standard fonts we all know, like Calibri, Times New Roman, Arial, all that kind of those kinds of fonts. That said, when a designer creates a font, they're creating something that theoretically could be protected under copyright. And when you have access to the fund, usually there are certain disclaimers that are made, like you could be able to use it for personal use, but there does come the responsibility of purchasing the font or getting extra permission, depending on where you're downloading the font, for commercial use. And clearly, if you're using a font for a book cover or even within the context of a book, that is commercial use in nature. And I know we've talked about this before in previous videos. There is a little bit of a great divide of what qualifies as commercial use. Some theorists and academics would say that commercial use is when something is soliciting a transaction. There are other people that would say it's a bit more broad, where it's any scenario where someone is reasonably making some type of profit. So there are people that would say commercial use is only limited to, let's say, an advertisement where you're telling people that, let's say this clothing item is for $10. You could buy it at Target. But there are people that could also argue that when you go to a store physically, and let's say you pick up a book in this case, and you turn it over and it has the price of the book on the back, that is also qualifying as commercial use, no different, and soliciting a transaction at that, no different than the actual ad campaign itself. So when you're using fonts in a commercial manner like that without the permission or without the proper licensure from the graphic designer that created it, that's when it becomes very problematic. Now, of course, there are a lot of authors out there that make their own covers, that make their own, manuscripts, and they self-publish. What do you do in these types of scenarios? First, I would say if you're going to a third-party website like defont.com or any other font website, you'll want to see if each designer where you're downloading a font contains specific rules about commercial use. Sometimes they may prevent or bar you from using it in a commercial manner. There are others that will require it, but for a fee. And oftentimes you may see that there are font options where you have to pay a fee in order to access the commercial licensure. But then you could go down, I think, the best route, which is going through Adobe, which offers an insane palette of different fonts to choose from. The great thing about Adobe fonts is that they actually do contain the disclaimer that you can use it for commercial use. So as long as you're using an Adobe font, regulated item, for the most part, you're pretty much good to go on using it on a commercial front because your membership to the Adobe Creative Cloud or a specific part of the Adobe software palette allows you that permission to use it in a commercial manner. But it does require thoughtful review of all the terms and conditions. You do want to make sure that you're reading that. And if you have any shadow of a doubt of what the heck you're reading, go talk to a lawyer, publishing lawyer at that, who can help read the guidelines for you and tell you if using a specific font for commercial use is allowed or prohibited in a certain circumstance.
And if you are licensing a font, you also want to make sure that you are aware of how long it's licensed for. Sometimes there are terms and conditions, and sometimes it's per project. So just because you purchase it or you license it without paying, you are only allowed to use it on a certain project, and you have to relicense it every time you are going to use it for a different project, including follow-up books in your series. So if you license it for book 1, you may need to license it for book 2 and 3 and all the extra things that you are going to be creating as well. So make sure you're reading those terms of service and you're very, very clear on what that means for you. If you're working with a graphic designer, you should check in with them and just make sure that all the fonts are cleared for use. And if you are working with a graphic designer, and I hope that you are, you also want to ask what that font is so that you can go and license it for your marketing use, so that you have it for your graphics and all of those things. So make sure you do your due diligence when it comes to your fonts. And if you've got questions, go ask a lawyer. Your lawyer will be able to help you.
And one other thing I want to add to that, there are a lot of amazing graphic designers that make different types of fonts, but be very wary of the ones that mimic the font that are used in other people's IP. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I've seen fonts that are mimicking, let's say, the Star Wars logo or the Harry Potter typeface font or Avengers or any other major franchise that has been developed into a major book series or film franchise or TV show. Odds are that graphic designer is making that for like a fun parodic purpose, but I could guarantee you that if you were to make a font featuring the typeface that is used in all the Star Wars movies, you would get a cease and desist from Lucasfilm arguing that there could be reasonable consumer confusion of your use of that typeface font on your book cover or in the context of your book, as to lead people to believe that the book has some type of affiliation with the Star Wars film franchise. So not only should you be wary of, you know, who you're working with and, you know, understanding the terms, but also be mindful and I would say, you know, practice like a modicum of common sense. And if you see that there's a font typeface that is affiliated with a film franchise, odds are that graphic designer is not in a position to grant you a commercial license. So I would steer clear of those types of fonts, but anything else that is organically created by a said graphic designer should be full fair game. And obviously, using reputable sources like Adobe Font is definitely the way to go because I could say it with every sense of, you know, my being that everything on that platform is legitimate, not infringing on anyone else's IP. It is, you know, fully created for Adobe customers.
And it is also important to note that if you have a font that you like but isn't quite right, your graphic designer can do some tweaking. So as long as you have the rights to be using those fonts, they can move the kerneling around. They can add some swooshes in there. They can make things a little more specific to what you are looking for your book cover and to match genre expectations. So have these conversations with your graphic designer before they get into the design phase so that you are getting what you need and what is going to work best for your books. If you have questions on licensing things for your book covers or the interiors of your books or anything on the legal side of the publishing industry, now is the time to drop it. Tony is coming back for upcoming episodes to get our questions answered, and we want to make sure we're keeping you safe and legally protected in this space. So make sure that you let us know what we need to discuss next. And as always, you can reach out to Tony on his social media. Tony, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at the IP Professor, and you can check out my entertainment law podcast called End Scene, with new episodes dropping every Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Drop your questions down below. Tony is coming back for upcoming episodes, and we drop daily videos helping you navigate the world of publishing, from your writing to your publishing to your marketing, to make this your most profitable year ever with the least amount of stress, overwhelm, and time commitment on the content you're creating. We'll see you in the upcoming episodes.